Okay, today we're going to start lesson 2.14, a new culture. Continue working on the Roaring Twenties activity sheet. You can also continue to work on your research project. Goals for this lesson: identify elements of the new youth culture that emerged during the 1920s, recognize modernist trends in art and literature, identify intended and unintended consequences of the 18th Amendment, and analyze reactions to societal changes during the 1920s. So remember it's not in this lesson, but it was in the previous lesson, your Roaring 20 sheet. The answer key for it is lesson 15. So if you don't have that yet, be sure to check out the lesson answer key as well. And for this lesson, we are going to start on page 652, and we're going to read through 664. So it'll be a longer reading here today. Starting with communications and mass culture. Let's look at the picture first. Boys gather around a radio in 1929. The radio enabled people far apart to get the same news often at the same time. So like we sit around and watch TV today, sat around and listened to the radio back then. In the 1920s, as automobiles sped people from one city to another, and as airplanes shrank the space between continents, new forms of communication and media brought Americans closer together. For over 70 years, telegraph lines have bound the country. Between 1915 and 1930, the number of telephone lines nearly doubled from 10.5 million to 20 million. Magazine circulation exploded, increasing from 18 million in 1890 to more than 200 million in 1929, which worked out to 1.6 magazines per Americans per month. Radio came into commercial use in the 1920s. Radio allowed farmers in Oregon to enjoy the same news and entertainment as their countrymen in New York or Chicago, often at the same time. In 1922, there were about 30 radio stations operating in the United States. A year later, there were more than 500. Local stations began to link into bigger networks. The National Broadcasting Company, NBC, formed in 1926, following the next year by the Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS. By the end of the decade, some 10 million American households tuned into their radio sets to hear the national news, live baseball games, or popular fiction and comedy shows. Going to the movies. By the close of the 1920s, nearly every town in the United States had a movie theater. National ticket sales averaged 100 million a week in a country of about 123 million people. For most of the 1920s, as well as the preceding decade, movie theaters were silent. Bits of narration or dialogue were projected onto the screen, and often a pianist or organist in the theater played along to underscore the action. Americans adored their silent film stars like Lillian Gish and Clara Bow. They swooned at the adventures of the dashing Rudolph Valentino. They laughed at Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton, who made use of the potential of film to capture physical comedy. For example, in Safety Last, in 1923, Harold Lloyd dangled from the hands of a clock high above a city street. Charlie Chaplin, a British-born actor, created an enduring character known as the Little Tramp. Chaplin's silent films, including The Gold Rush, 1925, were well loved on both sides of the Atlantic. As movies became more popular, the motion picture industry in Hollywood, California became big business. In 1927, Hollywood released The Jazz Singer. The first feature-length film was spoken dialogue. When the film star Al Jolson uttered, "You ain't heard nothing yet," he made movie history. For The Jazz Singer, Warner Brothers recorded the soundtrack on phonograph records, which were synchronized to the picture projector using a special set of motors. Later technology would print the sound information on the film itself. After the success of The Jazz Singer, the talkies, as films with sound were called, soon dominated the movie industry. A year after The Jazz Singer was released, more than 1,000 theaters installed sound equipment. The Fox studio stopped producing silent movies in 1929, and other studios soon followed. And here's a picture of that movie with guy dangling from the clock. Safety Lost. The beginnings of mass popular culture. Much as canals, railroads, and telegraph lines had unified the young, sprawling nation in the 19th century, new mass media connected it to an increasingly diverse American citizenry in the opening years of the 20th. Movies and radio shows brought the same characters, jokes, stereotypes, and fashions to millions of people across the country. Rather than targeting a single town, city, or region, broadcasters and advertisers could now reach a national market. The United States was developing a national popular culture. Young men across the continent tried to flirt like movie star Rudolph Valentino, while young women rushed to discount stores to buy affordable imitations of actress Clara Bow's wardrobe. Popular music, Tin Pan Alley. In the 1920s, as phonographs became increasingly available in working class and middle class homes, as radios became a staple of American life, the songwriters of Tin Pan Alley composed a wealth of immensely popular music. The term Tin Pan Alley refers to a stretch of modest office buildings on West 28th Street in Manhattan, just south of New York City's famous Broadway Theater District. There, in the late 19th century, music publishers began working for stronger copyright protections. A songwriter like Stephen Foster should have become a rich man from sales of popular songs like Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair and Oh Susanna, Won't You Cry For Me, but he didn't. To ensure just rewards for their work, composers and music publishers organized their efforts, mainly in the New York neighborhood whose nickname, Tin Pan Alley, eventually came to represent America's thriving commercial music industry. In the 1920s, Tin Pan Alley was home to some of the most creative songwriters America has produced. Many churned out songs for popular Broadway musicals, and some remained productive and popular well after the 1920s. There was George M. Conan, who wrote You're a Grand Old Flag and the rousing World War I tune Over There. And we listened to that in a previous lesson, remember? Over there, over there. I know I'm not a great singer, but I'm going to do it anyway. There was Irving Berlin, who wrote Blue Skies and God Bless America and White Christmas. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. There was Cole Porter, a master of witty, sophisticated lyrics in songs like Anything Goes and I Get a Kick Out of You. There were the brothers George and Ira Gershwin, who collaborated on many musicals, producing songs like I Got Rhythm, I Got Music, and so forth. In 1924, George composed a piece for piano and small orchestra, Rhapsody in Blue. Fusing elements of jazz and classical music, Rhapsody remains one of the best-loved musical compositions from the 20th century. We should try to listen to that. Celebrities in sports. In the 1920s, America's popular culture embraced many new celebrities in sports. Radio, movie newsreels, and rapidly expanding city newspapers provided plenty of publicity for sports figures, which led to an unprecedented number of American athletic heroes. Helen Wills did not lose a set of tennis in singles play between 1926 and 1932, winning the French, United States, and Wimbledon Open tournaments, at least 4 times each. In 1930, Bobby Jones won all 4 major golf tournaments, the first ever Grand Slam. Jim Thorpe, an Olympic track hero, and Red Grange, the galloping ghost, tore up the grid run in the newly formed National Football League. Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney pummeled opponents in the boxing ring. Crowds swelled, and so did the personalities and pocketbooks of the athletes. None compared with George Herman, Babe Ruth, the New York Yankees outfielder who single-handedly transformed baseball from a game of precision into one known for its power. A pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, Babe Ruth was sold to the New York Yankees in 1920 and swiftly became baseball's all-time long ball legend. Converted into an outfielder, he hit 59 home runs the next year. The Sultan of SWAT finished his career with 714 home runs. That Babe was also the highest paid baseball player of the era, earning more than $1 million during his athletic career. But he made even more money away from the game, which is true for athletes today too with all their endorsements. Babe was the first professional athlete to have an agent who arranged lucrative guest appearances, vaudeville tours, and barnstorming home run derbies in the off-season. Ruth endorsed fishing rods, alligator shoes, and Cadillacs. In 1921, a candy company capitalized on the Slugger's fame when it introduced the Baby Ruth, a chocolate-covered nougat and peanut bar. It quickly became a popular favorite, and even today the manufacturer continues to market it as the official candy bar of Major League Baseball. However, it also should be known that Babe Ruth was named after President Grover Cleveland's daughter. I believe it was Grover Cleveland's daughter, Ruth. But they changed meaning later on when Babe Ruth came along. And here's a picture of Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT. The New Woman. In 1925, the New Republic magazine reported, "Women have come down off the pedestal lately. They are tired of this mysterious feminine charm stuff. Maybe it goes with independence, earning your own living and voting. By the 1920s, millions of American women worked, voted, and broke with traditions that had long governed their dress and behavior. Women have highly resolved that they are just as good as men, the magazine explained, and intend to be treated as so. Women at work. By 1929, a quarter of American women over the age of 16 held jobs, as did more than half of all single women. The work was rarely glamorous. Where there is routine work, little glory, and low pay, a writer observed, men proved willing to admit women to an equal share of the spoils of office. Almost a third of employed women worked in domestic service, and most of the rest were secretaries, factory workers, or store clerks. They faced overwhelming wage discrimination. Saleswomen, for example, earned less than half as much as their male counterparts. Nevertheless, working women discovered a new world of freedom. Earning wages allowed them to move out on their own. Free from the supervision of their families, many young women did things that would have made their Victorian mothers blush. They wore makeup, danced at jazz clubs, and went on unsupervised dates with young men. The Flappers. By the early 1920s, the nation had given this new woman a name, the Flapper. Images of Flapper gazed out of magazine covers and movie screens. Popular film actresses like Clara Bow, Colleen Moore, and Louise Brooks glamorized the image of the flapper. Their bobbed, short-cropped hair and short sleeveless dresses became synonymous with the new woman of the 1920s. Flapper fashion swept America. When school authorities in Somerset, Pennsylvania tried to impose a strict dress code on high school girls, the students revolted, chanting, "I can show my shoulders, I can show my knees, I'm a freeborn American, I can show what I please." In an era when women could vote and participate in the workforce, the flapper represented a new kind of social and cultural freedom for women. Though not all women, to be sure. Many people, especially in the older generation, were shocked by the brazen behavior and boyish look of the flappers. Flappers were blamed for many of the ills of the era, from rising divorce rates to mental illness. And here's a picture of a typical flapper. The short hair, short dress, sleeveless, makeup, totally new stuff. The youth culture. As reported in Middletown, sociologists Robert and Helen Lind study based on extensive interviews. One day in the mid-1920s, a group of Muncie, Indiana teenagers met at a local church to discuss the topic, what's wrong with the home? Parents don't know anything about their children and what they're doing, one boy began, to which a girl replied, they don't want to know. And another girl added, we won't let them know. A second boy spoke up and summed up the feelings of the new generation, ours is a speedy world and they're old. This was a new attitude in the 1920s. For the first time, the nation's youth were rejecting their parents' customs in favor of their own styles of behavior, dress, and consumption. The 1920s gave rise to America's first distinct youth culture. So teenagers out there listening to this recording, this is the beginning of your era, your youth culture. Teenagers. Adolescence became known as a separate entity of development for the first time. In the 1920s, new media and new technologies encouraged greater social freedoms for young Americans. Influenced in part by romantic movie idols and steamy magazine stories, they approached dating and sexuality with a frankness that worried their parents. In 1890, the Linds reported in Middletown, a well-brought-up boy and girl were commonly forbidden to sit together in the dark. The car changed all that. Once teenagers could drive off to a dance or party, dates at home seemed boring and old-fashioned. The automobile brought a freedom unimaginable to earlier generations. And we'll stop here at this point for this video and continue with the next one.